Howdy. Welcome to the Smart Grid Center webinar titled An Open Access Cross-Domain Approach to Analyzing the Impact of Extreme Events on Electricity Sector, what we learned from COVID-19 and 2021 Texas winter outage. I'm Andrea Kishney from the Smart Grid Center of Texas A&M Engineering Experiment Station. Before I introduce the speaker, let me ask you to keep your mic on mute and hold voicing your questions until the end of the presentation. However, you may also type a question in the Zoom chat window anytime. The presenter today is Dr. Brashier, Professor, Chancellor Aegis Fellow, and Presidential Impact Fellow in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Texas A&M University, and the Assistant Director for Energy Digitization at Texas A&M Energy Institute. Dr. Xie earned his bachelor degree from Tsinghua University in 2004, master's degree from Harvard in 2005, and his PhD from Carnegie Mellon in 2009. His industry experience includes working at ISO New England, Edison Mission, energy marketing and trading. His research interest includes modeling and control in data-rich large-scale systems, grid integration of green energy resources, and electricity markets. He was awarded numerous recognitions, including those from NSF, DOE, Oak Ridge National Lab, Texas A&M Engineering Experiment Station. Dr. Xie, take it away.
Thank you, Andrea. And it's great to see many of the old friends and some new faces through Zoom. Let me share my screen. And Andrea, could you please confirm if you can see the full screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So it's a great pleasure to be with you via Zoom on some of the recent work that we have been doing regarding, I would say, interesting approach to analyzing the evolving energy and power grid through an open access and cross-domain data-driven approach. So I'm going to talk about two particular case studies that we have conducted recently with a general theme that in the future, the cross-domain and sometimes unconventional data sources are going to become more and more important for us to analyze extreme conditions and extreme events on the electricity sector. And this is acknowledging my collaboration with a large group of graduate students, undergraduate students, as well as postdocs, and also my collaborating colleagues both at A&M and outside. So it really is a joint team effort. So I wish to express my sincere thanks for their inspiration and for their efforts during the past 18 months of challenging moments. So I'm going to first talk about very briefly on the overall electricity sector transition that we see that are happening, some of our thoughts of potential research challenges and opportunities and approaches to tackling those challenges. And then I'm going to talk about, in particular, how does extreme events affect the operation of the electricity sector. Then I'm going to share with you two particular case studies that we recently conducted and published, and then I'll draw some concluding remarks. So when it comes to the electricity sector, one has to put it in the context of the broader, perhaps, economy in general. And as we are going through these massive decarbonization efforts, one has to first recognize that the top two sectors of greenhouse gas emissions in the US and in most other countries are always transportation and electricity. So whatever we do in the decarbonization effort, one needs to take care of these top two sectors. And it seems that there seems to be a growing consensus on what might get us there. And that is to first decarbonize as much as possible on the electricity generation, namely putting a lot of renewables to replace some of the fossil fuel-based generation, and then try to electrify as much as possible the transportation sector, namely having the cars not run by gasoline, but run by hopefully quote unquote clean electrons. So as we are embarking upon this very ambitious agenda, our perhaps opinion is that a question for the audience is the grid infrastructure ready for that? And our opinion is that perhaps it's far from being ready for that. And as a way to elaborate some of these gaps and challenges, we recently published a research article at Jewel, a Cell Press article on this topic of asking, is the grid infrastructure ready for this ambitious carbon neutral transition? And also we have published a accompanying opinions piece at The Hill, arguing that building a resilient electric grid requires energy superhighways. So a vision for perhaps what are some of the important research topics that one ought to pursue when it comes to the future of the electric energy systems research. Our opinion is that we have at least in our group we have been doing this sort of a pyramid viewpoint of how we go about with this research. So we start from solid technological advances. After all, we are technologists. These technological innovations include things like advanced computing, things like advanced power electronics, things like advanced cyber physical security metrics, and then to show how they can technologically improve the operation and control of the large power grid. But we don't stop there, in the sense that we also need to make a conscious effort to convey the economic value of such new technology solutions. And that itself is, again, not enough. We also have to make an effort to convey this to the policymakers and the policy-making domain, because the grid is a closely intertwined technological, economic, and regulatory system. So these are some of the concrete activities that we have been doing in the past few years regarding this vision of going about future energy research topics. And there are a lot of specific, exciting research challenges. I know many of you are students out there, so just I'm going to share with you some of our thoughts about some challenging questions in research. How do we ensure, for example, the cyber and physical security in a power grid with massive amount of edge level distributed resources, things like solar and electric cars? And how do we design a market and procurement of flexibility in this carbon neutral power system? Because in the future, you need a lot of provision of flexibilities, but you want to do it in a market compatible and incentive compatible fashion, right? And then another very important topic, which will be the focus of today's talk, is how do we plan and prepare a coupled infrastructure, not only for the normal kind of a situation, but really for these extreme conditions, such as the one we saw during COVID, such as the one we saw in Texas in February. And so we're going to talk about that in today's presentation primarily. And I'm going to use two case studies to illustrate a common underlying framework, which is a open cross-domain data-driven framework to tackle some of these questions in a more scientific and quantitative manner. So let's start from the first study of the impact of COVID in 2020 on the US electricity sector, at least in the short run. So this was some data we obtained from the nighttime lighting data published by NASA. So NASA published this every week. on around the globe on the sort of a nighttime image of different parts of the world. And this is the city of New York, especially in the Manhattan area. So our students have taken some signal processing algorithms to remove the ambient lighting conditions. So what you see here are only referring to the brightness and lighting caused by human induced lighting activities. And as you could see, the nighttime light in the city of New York on the February 8th of 2020 at midnight versus on the April 25th of 2020, just about a month, 2 months apart. The nighttime image of the same location, the brightness was dimmed by almost 40%. The city is going darker, right? And that is we human beings are, extremely visual species. So when I first saw this picture, it really kind of struck me because it was a very visual, intuitive, direct manner of showing how COVID is affecting people's daily activities and thereby affecting potentially the electricity sector, because after all this lighting are induced by, turning on the light bulbs, right? So this kind of gave us a visual impression of what might have happened in the electricity sector through some other domains of data sources. So here's another sort of a visual chart of just to get you some direct impression of what COVID might have done on the electricity sector. And this is more of a power engineering viewpoint. This is the electricity consumption in the city of New York, in the New York ISO area during this period, right? So you can already see that there are indeed some very interesting trends. So this sort of just gave us some direct, intuitive, visual impression of what had happened, right? But then we thought, well, how could we do some more formal and quantitative understanding? Perhaps the first thing we should do is we should create a data hub and assessment framework. And in this data hub, we decided to make it based on all open data and make it open access and cross-domain. So as you could see, we can get some of the usual suspects of analyzing the electricity data, namely the ISO RTO kind of data set. But in addition to those, we also have got some very non-traditional data sources, such as we've got this public health data set from Johns Hopkins regarding COVID cases. We've also got some 30 million mobile devices data set regarding the location of these mobile devices from SafeGraph. And of course, you saw already the NASA's data set. So we call it the EMDA. And this data set became one of the key enabling architecture for us to begin to substantiate some of those impact of COVID on the electricity sector. And in the next few slides, I'm going to walk you through some of the more detailed quantitative studies that we have conducted. And there are some papers and news reports that coming out of it, which you might be interested. So the first question that we need to ask when we try to understand the impact of COVID on the electricity sector is, how do we quantify the impact of COVID on the electricity consumption itself, right? Of course, there are sort of two different approaches to that question. One is to say, well, how about we just look at the electricity consumption during the COVID, at least for the first pandemic wave, and then we just compare it to the historical data sets. For example, compare it to the electricity consumption of 2019 or 2018 and so on, and then try to extract the difference and call that as impact. Is that a good approach? Our point is that might not be the best approach. We should instead perhaps do something called counterfactual. So counterfactual is something that economists use a lot, which is to say, instead of comparing the data of electricity consumption during COVID with some historical data, one should really ask the following question, which is, if it weren't for COVID, how much would have been the electricity consumption during that time of 2020 in a region such as New York, right? So in other words, this is a counterfactual, or with some of the engineer, we call it a baseline, right? And creating such a reliable baseline is actually crucial. It's crucial in understanding the impact of COVID on the electricity consumption differences, right? So we have conducted a sort of a big data deep learning based ensemble backcast model to calibrate and compute that counterfactual electricity consumption. And you could see, some of the results in the first few months of the COVID lockdown across several regions. So the top table is table about different ISO RTOs. And the bottom one is about some major cities in those regions. So I just wanted to maybe highlight a few points. For example, if you look at New York City, the month of April and May, compared to this counterfactual data, there are some 14% to 15% of reduction, which is a substantial amount of changes, right? So then the natural question, next one would be, how do we explain those changes, right? And then perhaps for the policymakers, what might be some of the best indicator of such changes? And there really comes in the value and perhaps somewhat unexplored resources are those cross-domain data sets, right? So here I want to first point to you some of the visualization that we did based upon the mobile device location data in the US. So as you can see, this is basically 30 million mobile devices location during the first few months of the pandemic lockdown. As you can see, the percentage of population who are completely stay at home has gradually increased over those periods. And this is an animation, and I'll just give you some snapshots, which might give you a better calibration of the impact of the mobile devices location, which indicates people's movement, right? So there's also some other related location related data sets that we were able to plot. And I just wanted to kind of show you some interesting observation that we have found. If you recall last year at this time, or a little earlier like this time, the popular term in the media is social distancing, right? Everybody is talking about social distancing. But then if you look at some of the data, the word actually social distancing actually contains quite different connotation and ramification when it comes to some of the different policy and results of people's behavior. So I just wanted to kind of point to you two particular curves. One is this population of on-site workers. These are the people who actually commute to work in their offices. So as you could see, there was on average some flat pattern all the way until March 15 of last year. And you probably all know what happened on March 15, right? That's when the federal government declares the national emergency. So right immediately after that, you can see there's a sharp, significant drop of the population of on-site workers. Very, very abrupt changes, right? Whereas if you just go down one line, go to the data set about mobility in the retail sector, namely, these are the data that reflect how often you go to your local grocery shopping and shopping malls and things like that nature. You could see people were kind of already voting on their feet in the sense that, way before the national emergency declaration, people are already reducing their foot traffic to those retail sectors. So it's a gradual, slow change as compared to an abrupt, significant drop of the on-site workers. So, the word social distancing, may have very different connotation when it comes to top-down policy versus bottom-up individual behavior responses. And that was something sort of interesting to point out. So then here comes the real research question, which is, how does one think about or formulate a problem of understanding these different factors' impact on explaining the electricity consumption reduction? Because after all, that was what we were after, right? we would like to know, among different things, what are some of the major factors that might have caused the change of the electricity consumption. So if you want to think about it at the conceptual level, this is a question that really is about modeling the interdependencies of several factors who in themselves are interdependent with each other, right? Because you probably can guess that public health have something to do with the electricity consumption changes. Social distancing may have something to do with the electricity consumption changes. Shutdown of the commercial activities certainly have something to do with electricity consumption changes. But all these factors that are trying to explain the electricity consumption changes themselves are interdependent of each other, right? So in this case, we turn to a very important framework in the macroeconomics literature called vector autoregression, which is something pioneered by Professor Christopher Sims, who was a Nobel laureate at Princeton, which basically is a multivariate stochastic process that is able to model this type of linear interdependencies. As you probably know, in macroeconomics literature and studies, such questions arise quite often. For example, people were trying to understand what does exchange rates, import, export, labor situation have to do with the country's GDPs, right? So it's a very sort of a similar situation where the factors that we consider are indeed linearly interdependent with each other, right? So now we've got the data, we've got the analytical framework, we are ready to do some analysis, all right? So these are some of the results of this VAR analysis. So we just picked two particular cities, since these two cities have some interesting patterns. One is New York and one is Houston. And the y-axis is basically sort of the variance decomposition. You can roughly think about it, how much weight one particular factor could be used to explain the change of electricity consumption. So we picked the four key factors: public health data, population of on-site workers, stay-at-home population, and mobility in the retail sector. So as you could see, very interestingly, in the case of New York, the mobility in the retail sector plays the most dominant role when it comes to explaining the electricity reductions. Whereas in the case of Houston, it is the sort of a stay-home population that plays the more significant role in explaining the electricity reductions, right? So that's actually, if you think about it, it's something interesting to observe, because New York is a much more sort of a metropolitan and condensed region, and the city of New York thrives on commercial activities, and that's probably why the mobility in the retail sector, how often people go and visit the Broadway and so things like that, will play an important role in explaining the electricity consumption changes. Whereas perhaps in the case of Houston, it's a much more spread out city, and you have to really drive from point A to point B no matter where you are in the city. So so there is not so much of an impact on the retail sector mobility, but rather perhaps because people tend to live in bigger houses with large amount of air conditioning consumption, that stay-at-home population might have a higher weight in explaining some of these changes on electricity consumption. And not only you can do sort of a retrospective studies, you can also start to think of some of the what-if scenarios for policymakers. So on the bottom, you see some of this what-if scenario study, which we engineer call sensitivity studies often, right? Which basically says, if there were 1% increase on the daily new confirmed cases or any other factor that you picked, how much would have that change the electricity consumption in the next few days, right? So there will be some oscillation, and eventually things will, stabilize at some steady state, and that steady state could be viewed as the sort of a weight or sensitivity factor of that particular input factor on the electricity consumption reduction or increase, right? So to summarize this part, as you could see, the overall electricity sector was going through some fairly volatile changes in the first wave of the pandemic. Here we constructed a data hub as an infrastructure for understanding and analyzing a variety of different factors on the electricity consumption. And then perhaps the mobility in the retail sector seems to be a particularly strong factor that influencing the changes on the electricity consumption. And perhaps, when we kind of took the courses on load forecasting in the past, we would have never thought about using public health or mobility data for analyzing the power sector. But maybe in the future, that's something we have to keep in mind in our planning exercise. So that's maybe some interesting new data and new kind of domains of data that might offer some insights to the electricity sector. Then I want to move on to something more closer to home and more recent. Again, just to show you some more visual impact, we took this NASA's nighttime image data, this time in Houston, just 1 week apart of February 7th of 2021 and the February 16th of 2021. So as you could see, the brightness of the city was dimmed down by quite a bit. And it is really a very, very unfortunate event, which caused several hundreds of people died and significant amount of economic losses. Whereas detailed in-house closed door investigation is going on and is very importantly going on. One question that we were asking is, what are some of the first order important lessons that we learned of what happened during these extreme situations? And then to the broader research community who are concerned about energy and the extreme events in general, how could they, have a sense of what happened, and how could they have a sense of what could have been done in a corrective measure moving forward, right? So it is with that in mind that we developed this, again, open model, an extendable model for simulation and corrective measure assessment for the broader energy and climate community to understand this 2021 Texas power outage. So all the data and all the analysis that we conducted here are based upon open and published data and results from the open domains. And this is built upon some of the previous work on the idea of synthetic grid that was pioneered by my colleague, Professor Tom Overby and Professor Adam Birchfield. And in particular, we have developed and calibrated such a synthetic baseline model that tries to provide as realistic as possible representation of what had happened around that time frame in February of 2021. So it's a calibrated extreme event kind of synthetic grid model. And the results are compared and matched with the real records published by entities like ERCOT. And again, it serves a different purpose of trying to allow the research community who are in general concerned about energy and climate to have some first order understanding of this event and potentially some first order understanding of some of the possible corrective measures. And this is in complement to what is happening behind the door for much more detailed in-house investigations. So the first question that we have to do, of course, is that we need to do a careful calibration using this synthetic grid model, compare with some of the published eventful data sets during this actual winter outage event, right? So here we're showing you some of the calibration that we did and the level of closeness that we were able to get to the best that we can. In particular, as you can see here, the estimated generation capacity versus the actual online generation capacity, and also the actual load. So the actual load and the 7-day ahead load forecast, the counterfactual load forecast was calibrated based on the weather zone and the actual generation output data from all these different generation sources. So as you could see that in the most critical moments around February 15 to February 17th, the estimated generation capacity and the actual online generation capacity indeed match with each other quite well, right? And here we are also calibrating some of the generation by different sources. Here in particular, we show the wind and solar generation sources of the actual wind and solar generation published versus in our model, the counterfactual wind and solar generation that we have calibrated. So all the way until the beginning of the event, the two numbers quite matched with each other. But you could see that this winter storm has indeed caused a significant derating of the wind and solar generation. That is to say, if you were just to rely on the available wind speed or available sunlight, you would have not been able to capture those situations because there were some other factors that was causing such a derating, such as extreme cold conditions, right? So also to kind of reproduce the outage event, we utilize again a DC optimal power flow just as a first order approximation on the amount of load shedding necessary to the grid operator. So the simulation procedures is that we change the counterfactual demand and renewable generation based upon the hourly data, and then would derate the thermal generation according to the event log and iteratively reduce or restore the load until the optimal power flow becomes feasible, and we compare the actual with the simulated data. So just to give you some sense of how the model performs compared to the actual data of load shedding, the shape of the load shedding is quite similar in comparison with the published load shedding data. There is about 0.88 correlation coefficient. And there was a noticeable difference after the noon of February 16th because as we noticed, there seems to report there is a generation capacity back online, but there seems to be a delayed load restoration in the process. And the actual load shedding for each weather zone had with 95% confidence interval also matches with the simulation quite reasonably closely. And the generation composition throughout the event was closely matched with the ERCOT meter data. So once you have a calibrated event for simulation on this synthetic grid, one can begin to conduct some, order of magnitude understanding. Again, it's not particularly accurate for implementation purposes, but at least it can provide some first order approximation of some of the corrective methods and how they might have some impact for the policymakers when it comes to corrective measures. Here, we studied 4 possible corrective measures. Winterization, that's something a lot of people talked about. Additional connection with the eastern or the western grid through HVDC, large-scale demand response, and potentially strategic storage facilities. So again, the model is available to all of you for use. Here, we utilize the particular reliability metric on energy not served to quantify when it comes to corrective measures, to quantify how much each or a combination of multiple of such corrective measures could have make a difference, right? Could have made a difference. Again, this is based on synthetic grid, so it's not to be confused with the actual in-house investigation. This is just to serve the purpose for the general, perhaps non-power engineering broader audience who wants to have some sense of first order understanding of some of these issues. And so here, I just want to show you some particular visualization of some corrective measure and maybe combination of different corrective measures. As you could see here, by winterizing 10 gigawatt, 20 gigawatt, and 30 gigawatt of generation fleets, one could have reduced the energy not served by 200, 400, 600 respectively, out of the total energy not served published by the actual event. And one thing we learned also was that while energy storage is very important, perhaps one should think of energy storage solutions on top of some other corrective measures, because energy storage alone would have been very, very, prohibitively costly to save the whole event, just because of the sheer amount of duration and the sheer amount of power load shedding that occurred due to these supply-demand shortages. So to summarize the second part, we have developed this open and extendable synthetic grid model that is built upon some of the prior work of the research community, in particular Professor Overby's group, and calibrated for this particular extreme event. And we hope that this could serve as a platform for the broader energy research community to quantitatively assess the severity and some of the corrective measures of this February event in Texas. And these data sets are assembled and in the open domain, and it served hopefully as a resource for the broader research community from various different backgrounds. And we calibrated and validated by reproducing the load shedding process during this outage in consecutive simulations. And then we studied for corrective measures to quantitatively analyze what could have been done differently in mitigating the extent of the power outage. So to summarize, we presented you two particular case studies, but both studies are motivated by the fact that electricity sector is really a very important infrastructure enabler for significant decarbonization. And I think a lot more research needs to be done in order to modernize the grid under those extreme conditions, in particular as we march along this decarbonization effort. And an open, extendable, and data-driven approach seems to have shed some lights on some of the technical and policy measures in handling those extreme conditions. This is by no means complete. We hope and we would be very happy to see the community to continue building upon these efforts to develop further extendable models for such extreme events analysis. For example, what is the carbon impact? What is the cyber physical security impact on large grid during these energy transitions, and many more. And with that, I would like to thank you for your interest and your attention. And I will be happy to take any questions. I already see some people raising their hands. Apologies, I was not able to address your question during the presentation, but I'd be happy to talk with you now.
Thank you, Dr. Yoshi. There was in the chat window, there is a comment. Somebody is saying that I think it's important to point out that both of these dates that you showed were Saturdays. I think they were one of the first slides that you were showing.
That's why we picked we want to make it sure it is, we are comparing the same day of the week, because there is a strong weekly cyclical behavior. Exactly, you're right, Shelley.
Dr. Rosboldik, he says, does the model represent the effect of temperature on the use of electricity for heating and the effect of heat pumps becoming resistive load during extreme events?
So thank you, Ross, for these very insightful questions. To the extent that we present this, calibrate this event for the load, to the extent that we were modeling them, we did not model this level of detail of the effect of the heat pumps becomes resistive to load during the extreme cold conditions. All we did was we tried to calibrate the load according to the sort of the baseline and the counterfactual forecast, and then we try to calibrate the amount of reduction or peak load or load shedding, namely the amount of load we could have served versus the amount of load we actually served. But that did not consider the level of detail that you were referring to. But we certainly appreciate this point, and we have trying to continue improve the validity and detail of such load modelings. Yeah.
I see that David Welsh, he raised his hands. David, would you like to express your comments or question now?
Yes. Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask, do you guys have an API with the software so that we can enhance what's already there? One of the major things that you're not bringing up in the ERCOT in the generation is the interdependency work, because what really was happening with the generators, especially the natural gas generator, is you had a scenario of worst case scenarios. Approximately 70% of all heat generation, I should say heating in businesses and homes in the Midwest is natural gas driven. When you start looking at now the load profile change of the customers, which you've been showing, now you've got the worst of two. You've got 42% of all generation now at natural gas. At the same time, you got 72% of all the homes being heated with natural gas. So a lot of the problems that you saw there with the generation was the fact that you didn't have the infrastructure had not been built to support both electric generation and home fuel delivery generation, to the homes. So, that these are the kind of things that we do at DOE that you have a very nice model there, but we would like to maybe look at your models and then enhance them, taking in these facts that we know to see what that actually comes out as. And that's why I wanted to ask the question.
So David, thank you very much for raising this point. This is indeed an extremely timely question. In fact, we have just completed a follow-up paper to be published at the North American Power Symposium 2021 on this topic of elaborating the critical importance of these interdependencies of these two infrastructure between natural gas and power grid. And to your original question, do we have an API? I guess the answer is yes. All the data and model is available out there in the GitHub, and you are more than welcome to check it out. And we would actually, as we speak, we are working very hard to try our best to include this very important aspect of these interdependencies between natural gas failure and power grid failures. So yes, thank you very much for raising this point.
All right, thank you.
The next question is, does the synthetic model consider the demand and supply of fossil fuels, coal, natural gas during extreme events?
So I'm trying to understand this meaning, what is demand supply of fossil fuel. So in some sense it does, because what is happening is that in this synthetic grid model, we are basically trying to calibrate very carefully based upon the real data published on what exactly are the amount of generation failure, namely, lack of supply of generation from these different fossil fuel resources in the available generation data itself. So in some sense, it does consider this demand and supply. But I think you are referring to perhaps a similar point to David's, which is, could we also consider some of the upstream situations, such as the fuel supply itself infrastructure, like natural gas pipelines? And to that extent, it has not yet considered, but we do intend to include those in the future. In fact, we are working very hard on this topic now.
There is a question about your ERCOT modeling. Does it include operations of the DAM, RTM?
So thank you, Lee, for the question. I suspect you're referring to the pricing aspect of the day-ahead market, the real-time market operations. First of all, this is a synthetic grid model that we are sort of trying to conduct this DCOPF for the real-time operation. So to the extent that we can elaborate the impact of these extreme events on the load shedding, we sort of internalize that in the DCOPF, which maybe you could call it the real-time market. But we have not calibrated the pricing behavior, because that's actually a much harder question. It's something that we were thinking about, but we just did not have the time to do that yet. Yeah.
Will the presentation slides be available? I suppose they will be, right? Will be posted on the website.
Right. Yeah.
And then the next is to provide the GitHub link of the model.
Yes.
Could you do that?
I think the GitHub link has just been already posted by my student and co-author on this paper.
Oh, okay, great. Yes. The next question for this COVID-19. I may not need to read it, since you can see it. COVID-19 resulted in the negative gas prices, I think, in 2020. Does it somehow affect natural gas power plant? Do you think there is any correlation with the Texas outage?
That's a very interesting question, and I was asked the same question before. I have not studied this longer term, or maybe we should call midterm impact of COVID on the gas price, and then how does that then associate with the Texas winter outage? Perhaps it's not a, again, this is just my off the top of my head, informal answer would be that there might be not a significant impact, because during that February event, it was a tremendous shortage of natural gas of supply. So I would probably not have put the COVID as a major impact on the downward side of the gas price on the February 2021 event.
And this is the last question so far from Ben Smith. What did your synthetic modeling of the increase of HVDC ties indicate?
What did your synthetic modeling of the increase of, oh, okay, yes, so let me go back to that. So we kind of studied just some hypothetical scenario in which we added 2 HVDC lines to the bus representing these 2 particular nodes, one to the west, one to the east of the North American interconnection. And each one studied for 1 gigawatt of interconnection capabilities. And basically, long story short, the rough answer is that this 1 gigawatt would have reduced the peak load shedding by just about 1 gigawatt of effectiveness on the load shedding avoided. Yeah.
Yeah. The next, I don't know if it's a comment, seems to be about the ERCOT test system. Would you read it in the chat window, please, by Lei? Because
I just wanted to mention that we do have a test system that uses Tom Overby's et al. Synthetic grid construction method. It's incorporated in, but it also has the day-ahead real-time market operations tailored to ERCOT running over or operating over this synthetic grid. So we do get a much, I believe, from what you've said, we would get a more powerful fitting to the actual way the markets operate together with the grid operations and over successive days, by the way. So it's a Java Python implementation. So we actually did this with PNNL and Tom McDermott at PNNL. So that may be something that could be combined, because we do a co-simulation with our ERCOT test system and a distribution system. And I would presume you could do a co-simulation with your particular grid instead of ours and run the market for that. I'm not sure, but that sounds to me like it would be an interesting direction to try to combine the economic and the physical operations a little more carefully. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lei, for that, for bringing that up, and indeed, for doing a lot of important work along these lines. And I can certainly see there is a good synergy here. As you know, this is an extremely stressful and eventful period in which our focus on this particular paper has been on the physical side of the operation, just to making sure that the supply demand is being able to kind of cross and so on. So there was a less attention on the market side of the events, but it certainly would be interesting to try to leverage your capabilities and then see if we could, to the best we can, reproduce the market situation, as many of us have seen on this skyrocketing wholesale prices during those few days, right?
Prospaldic had a comment, oil price futures were negative briefly in 2020, but he is not aware of natural gas prices being negative at gas hubs. Do you have any?
Right. I would agree with what Ross said. Yeah.
The next question: did you consider modeling improvements in energy efficiency and what that would have meant in February? Would you consider that in future studies?
Doug, thank you very much for your question. In fact, I'm working with one of my students as we speak on finalizing a paper to be presented at the North American Power Symposium on some aspect of what we call load rationing, or maybe load, just, I guess what you're driving at is that you could have been much more, cognizant on the amount of loads you would have consumed during those extreme cold conditions, right? Basically, maybe you could have saved some of the unnecessary loads by just improving the energy efficiency codes and so on. And we're trying to quantify along the similar line of saying, if we were to allow for some kind of a load rationing, maybe each households were provided with 30%, 40% of their nominal rated load, using modern technologies to allow some of smart appliances to shut down or turn on, how much we could have saved in terms of this, mandatory load shedding and energy not served. So yeah, we're going to. So we are considering some aspect of that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing this information about ERCOT test systems for everyone to see. And then Bernard Ross, so in your opinion, could large-scale demand response, including direct load control, be implemented to a high enough degree to replace load shedding by system operators? What do you think?
Yeah, so thank you for this question. That's sort of related with my previous answer, in the sense that with some level of automation, some level of demand response, perhaps, one of the study we are doing now suggests that we should also have some, investment and bumping up on the energy storage capabilities. Then, to a large degree, we could have replaced these mandatory load sheddings. Yeah.
Well, if Is there any more question, comment? If not, thank you, Dr. Shi, for this cutting edge and inspiring presentation and leading this good discussion. And thank you, everybody, for joining us in this webinar regarding the next Smart Grid Center webinar. It's titled Design of a Robust Cyber Shield for Grid-Connected PV System via Digital Watermarking Principle. And it's going to be presented by Dr. Prasad Enjeti, Professor at Electrical and Computer Engineering at ENM on the 28th of October. More information will be distributed later, so please stay tuned. Until then, stay safe, everybody, and thanks once more for attending. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Andrea. Bye.
Bye.